Die Ärzte gegen den Atomkrieg sind eine politische Organisation, die ein sehr breites Spektrum hat, ein sehr breites Spektrum von Aufgabenfeldern, nicht nur Atomwaffen und Friedensarbeit, sondern eben auch zum Beispiel eine Arbeitsgruppe, die heißt Root Causes of Conflict in the Age of Total Market, wo man sich also eben mit Konfliktprävention und Konfliktursachen beschäftigt. Und wo der Terrorismus natürlich auch eine Rolle spielt und die Ärzte gegen den Atomkrieg gehen eben so weit und gehen auch den investigativen Weg und lassen sich nicht damit abspeisen, was also sozusagen immer in der Presse steht, sondern haben auch eigene Journalisten und eigene Ärzte in den Ländern, wo sie detaillierte Informationen herbekommen. Und so ist auch das Thema 9/11 bei den Ärzten gegen den Atomkrieg auf der Agenda. Ich kann kurz was zu mir persönlich sagen, wie ich dazu komme, dann auch persönlich daran interessiert zu sein, solch eine Veranstaltung zu machen, mit der Hilfe von anderen Gruppen, eben auch der Arbeitsgruppe Zukunftspolitik Hamburg, zu der ich gleich noch was sagen werde. Für mich persönlich kam nämlich das Thema 9/11 völlig überraschend. Ich war nur genereller Interessent für Politik, also üblicher Zeitungsleser und Fernsehgucker, der also die Nachrichten verfolgt. Und als ich dann durch mein Interesse für Dokumentarfilme über dieses Thema 9/11 stolperte, war ich doch sehr überrascht. Und zwar überrascht über die Argumente und die Tatsachen, die überhaupt hinter dieser, was dann offiziell Verschwörungstheorie genannt wird, welche Tatsachen dahinter stehen und wie dicht eigentlich das Netz der Informationen ist, das einen zu so einer Theorie kommen lässt. Es war eine große Überraschung für mich und das hat mich auch dazu veranlasst, dann selber nachzuforschen, diese Informationen, die ich bekommen habe, zu verifizieren, und dann hat mich das eben auch veranlasst, da öffentlich tätig zu werden, da das ja sehr selten ist. Nur wenige Gruppen engagieren sich da, um wirklich in die Tiefe hier öffentlich wirksam zu werden und Informationen anzubieten. Zum Beispiel nur ein kleines Beispiel, wie wenig Information es in der Öffentlichkeit gibt. Es gibt ja viele Wissenschaftssendungen, auch im Radio, wo wissenschaftliche Errungenschaften, die neu sind, publiziert werden. Eine der wichtigsten Neuerungen im Zusammenhang mit 9/11 war ja die Identifikation des Sprengstoffs, der im World Trade Center benutzt worden ist an 9/11. Das war jetzt im Februar 2009. Es war eine wissenschaftliche Veröffentlichung in einem wissenschaftlichen Journal, einem englischsprachigen Journal. Und sowas ist ja eigentlich durchaus eine Sensation. Also eine Sensation auch für die, sagen wir mal, für den Wissenschaftsteil von normalen Zeitungen. Das konnte man natürlich aber nirgends lesen. Es war also nirgends veröffentlicht in irgendeiner normalen Zeitung, dass jetzt eine Arbeit veröffentlicht worden ist, welcher Sprengstoff das genau gewesen ist. War eine sehr interessante Arbeit. Sie sehen auch am Eingang, habe ich eine CD gesehen, da ist die drauf gebrannt und auch ein Link, kann man sich alles am Eingang anschauen. So. Ich will mich sehr bedanken bei verschiedenen Personen in der IPPNW, im Ärzte gegen den Atomkrieg, die es möglich gemacht haben, dass eine solche Veranstaltung stattfindet. Das ist einmal Manfred Lotze aus der Regionalgruppe Hamburg und Matthias Jochheim aus dem Vorstand in Berlin, der sich auch dafür stark gemacht hat, dass eine solche Veranstaltung stattfinden kann. Weiterhin bedanken möchte ich mich bei den Mitgliedern der Arbeitsgruppe Zukunftspolitik Hamburg, die sehr tatkräftig daran mitgearbeitet haben, dass also die Öffentlichkeitsarbeit und die Plakate und so weiter alles hängen und dass wir diesen Raum hier so voll kriegen, wie er ist. Und diese Arbeitsgruppe Zukunftspolitik Hamburg ist eigentlich nur wir haben es genannt, ein Zusammenschluss kritischer Zeitbeobachter. Das ist eigentlich alles. Und wenn man heutzutage kritischer Zeitbeobachter ist, dann kann man schon eine ganze Menge erstaunliche Erfahrungen machen. Ich stelle noch kurz vor, bevor Dr. Griffin sprechen wird, habe ich noch die Organisatorin der europäischen Tournee von Dr. Griffin eingeladen, Annie Meschen aus England, die seit kurzer Zeit in Düsseldorf wohnt, hier noch eine kurze Einführung zu geben über die europäische Tournee von Dr. Griffin. Dr. David Ray Griffin ist ja sowas wie der Vater der akademischen 9/11-Truth-Bewegung. Also es gibt ja in der 9/11-Truth-Bewegung verschiedene Ansätze. Einmal ist es eine Dokumentarfilmbewegung aus dem Internet und dann sind es die unabhängigen Journalisten und aber eben auch eine große Gruppe von Akademikern und Leuten, die in Berufen tätig sind, die mit 9/11 zu tun haben, also Politiker und Architekten und so weiter. Und einer der ersten, der an diesem akademischen Zweig der 9/11-Aufklärung beteiligt ist eben Dr. David Ray Griffin. Ich freue mich ganz besonders, dass wir ihn für diese Tour hier nach Deutschland haben einladen können. Es gibt ja das ist ja eine Europatournee und Hamburg ist der einzige Ort in Deutschland, wo er auftreten wird. Dr. David Ray Griffin ist emeritierter Professor für Religionsphilosophie und Theologie an der Claremont School of Theology und am Claremont Graduate University. Und daneben ist er auch noch Co-Direktor des Center for Process Studies. Dieses Center for Process Studies bezieht sich auf die Philosophie von Alfred North Whitehead. Ist also eine philosophische Universität. Das ist sein eigentliches Arbeitsgebiet. In dem hat er auch über 20 Bücher veröffentlicht und er hat insgesamt 34 Bücher veröffentlicht, wobei die letzten 7 Bücher sich alle um das Thema 9/11 drehen und hier Aufklärung leisten. Besonders erstaunlich, dass nachdem hauptsächlich diese Bücher in der Rezeption unter ferner liefen, abgehandelt wurden, ist jetzt im November 2008 sein neuestes Buch, The New Pearl Harbor Revisited, gewählt worden von den Publishers Weekly als Pick of the Week. Und das ist schon eine ziemliche Auszeichnung in Amerika, wenn man auf dieser Liste steht. Das heißt also, auch hier ist erstaunlicherweise doch ein Umdenken zu verzeichnen, was so vor einigen Jahren noch nicht möglich war. Es kann also sein, dass diese Veranstaltung hier und überhaupt die 9/11-Truth-Bewegung noch eine wichtige Rolle spielen wird bei den Aufdecken der politischen Zustände in Amerika und auch in Europa. Dr. David Ray Griffin arbeitet zurzeit an 2 weiteren Büchern zum Thema und wir sind gespannt. Die werden bald rauskommen, was da an neuen Daten und Fakten drinsteht. Ja, bleibt mir eigentlich noch kurz was zum Ablauf zu sagen. Der Vortrag, also Annie Mechen und David Ray Griffin werden natürlich auf Englisch sprechen. Die Übersetzung ist immer eine sehr teure Sache, deswegen geht das nicht so einfach. Wir haben uns gedacht, wir lassen sie ganz einfach auf Englisch reden. Beide sprechen sehr verständlich, das kann man eigentlich ganz gut verstehen. Wir machen im Anschluss dann eine Frage, eine Möglichkeit, wo Sie Möglichkeit haben, Fragen zu stellen. Also Sie haben diese Zettel und diese Stifte bekommen, sodass wir da etwas schneller durchkommen, indem Sie einfach Ihre Frage ruhig auf Deutsch aufschreiben, wenn Sie wollen. Und wir werden die dann kurz vor Ende der Veranstaltung, der Rede von David Ray Griffin, einsammeln. Und ich werde die dann sozusagen, die Fragen, die doppelt sind und so weiter, werde ich dann auf Englisch stellen, sodass das ein bisschen konzentriert ist. Ganz zum Schluss, wenn wir auch mit dieser Frage und Antwort, mit dem Frage- und Antwortteil durch sind, gibt es noch für die Journalisten, die hier sind, eine Möglichkeit, eine Art Pressekonferenz zu machen, also wo die Zuschauer schon sozusagen wieder nach Hause gehen können und die Leute von der Presse noch die Möglichkeit haben, ein paar Fragen und Antworten direkt zu stellen mit ihrem Equipment, was sie dann mit haben. Wer sich noch Informationsmaterial mitnehmen will, ist herzlich willkommen, draußen am Büchertisch zum Beispiel eben die Zeitschrift Hintergrund zu kaufen, eine der ganz wenigen Zeitschriften, die sich mit Themen wie 9/11 und anderen Themen eben so tiefgehend beschäftigen, dass man hier auch Informationen bekommt, die nicht gefiltert sind. Und das ist eine Seltenheit heutzutage. Gut, das war's von mir. Ich übergebe erstmal das Wort an Annie Meschen und dann wird Dr. David Ray Griffin den Vortrag halten. Vielen Dank.
I just want to say a few words by way of introduction to the event. As Jens mentioned, I'm the tour organizer for the European leg of David Ray Griffin's spring tour. And he's, I think, doing 11 different cities over a period of about 20 days, a little break in between. And the response across the continent has been amazing. I just want to say a few words about why I think it's so important that we continue to do this sort of work and put a bit of context around the 9/11 Truth movement, the 9/11 Truth campaign. I started out as a spy back in the 1990s. I worked for the British spy agency MI5 and then ended up leaving, resigning, and blowing the whistle on their crimes and incompetence. And when I say crimes and incompetence, we are talking big-time crimes. They were conducting illegal investigations into politicians in the UK. They were allowing bombs to go off on British streets, which they could and should have prevented. And I even saw intelligence agencies involved in false flag terrorist attacks. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that concept. But when I say that, I mean that attacks happen, terrorism happens, and are blamed on one party, but are in fact carried out in secret by another. One very notable example of that in the 1990s was MI6, which is the UK James Bond type organisation, being involved in planning and financing an assassination attempt against Colonel Gaddafi of Libya. That assassination went wrong, but innocent people died, and the operation was also illegal. So I ended up leaving the service, and with my ex-colleague and ex-partner, David Shaler, we blew the whistle on the spies. And I just raised that to show to you that false flag is a political reality. The dark stuff that the spies are reputed to do is a political reality. And I think it's worth bearing that in mind when addressing other big terrorist attacks. And of course 9/11 is one that will be discussed today. But why is it so important to look at 9/11? This is an event that happened obviously in a different continent many years ago, and yet the repercussions are still affecting us globally today. We're looking, of course, at the event of 9/11 being the pretext for this unending war on terror. And that unending war on terror has inexorably led to 2 illegal wars in the Middle East to date, both Iraq and Afghanistan, with the possibility of further action in places like Iran. But we're also as well looking at 9/11 as a pretext for the shredding, destruction of our civil liberties and our human rights in our countries as well. I mean, in the UK, for example, we are seeing evidence coming out of the use of torture by the UK spies against terrorist suspects. We're seeing people being thrown in prison without trial. We are seeing activists on the streets protesting, being arrested for no good reason, purely so the police can ascertain their identity. And we're seeing a whole string of other laws as well coming in, where, for example, in the state of national emergency, your homes in the UK can now be seized. Your house can be seized and demolished, and you don't get any compensation, all in the name of protecting the state. So certainly in the UK, we are beginning to live in what looks like a police state, and this is all based on the fact of 9/11. But what if 9/11 is not all it looks to be? Of course, there is a mountain of evidence now that has come out from many, many experts, including, of course, David Ray Griffin, that contradicts the official account. And we have many professional bodies of people questioning the official account. We're looking at politicians for 9/11 Truth, architects and engineers. I know Richard Gage, the architect, was here a few months ago. Intelligence officers for 9/11 Truth, a whole range of different groups, all saying there is evidence that contradicts the official account, and we need a new and independent inquiry to get to the basis of that. Not just for justice for the victims on the day, and for the justice for the first responders who are sick because of 9/11, but also justice for those who have died in the Middle East as a result of the war on terror, and also to use a new account of 9/11 to halt the slide towards a police state that we're all facing. So I think it's a very important issue, and it's very central, a sort of exemplar of where a lot of things are going wrong with our political elites today, where the media can be spun and controlled, where the politicians can barefacedly lie to take us into war, and where we don't seem to have any real power over what our countries are now doing. So, as I said, there's a growing 9/11 movement across Europe. I've been privileged to have been part of helping to build that since 2005, when I picked up a copy of, ironically enough, Professor Griffin's The New Pearl Harbor, which was probably the earliest seminal work on 9/11 and the questions around it. And I read that book in one day, and I just thought, this is it. There are so many unanswered questions, we have to have a new inquiry. And since then, I've seen the UK movement burgeon. At one point, there were about 35 local groups going across the country. And since then, as well, with speaking tours and other events, we've seen every country across Europe has at least one good 9/11 truth group. We're talking from the south of Spain up to Finland, from Russia down to Greece. It is a fast-growing global activist movement of people who are concerned and angry about what's being done in our name. So welcome, all of you, for coming, and thank you very much, especially to those who are new to this issue. You're in for a treat today, where Professor Griffin will be going through the evidence, the very strong evidence, that we need a new inquiry for the justice for us all. So without more ado, I'd like to introduce Professor David Ray Griffin. Thank you very much.
Guten Tag. Mindful that English is the second or third language for many of you, I will try to speak langsam und deutlich. My lecture is called 9/11, Time for a Second Look. In suggesting that it is time for people to take a second look at 9/11, I have in mind primarily people who decided long ago that the attacks of 9/11 happened essentially the way the Bush-Cheney administration and the official reports about 9/11 said they happened, and who therefore decided that the so-called 9/11 truth movement, which disputes that account, is comprised of crazy conspiracy theorists with no capacity to evaluate evidence objectively. Having formed these views long ago, such people, including most journalists, have been impervious to any arguments presented by the truth movement. They simply roll their eyes and move on. However, both the truth movement and the available evidence have changed dramatically in the past 3 years. Because of these changes, it is not rational to reject the claims of the movement out of hand without taking a second look. If you are a person who has had such an attitude, you cannot, in the face of these changes, simply roll your eyes without exhibiting the very irrationality of which you may charge people whom you call conspiracy theorists. My lecture is also addressed, albeit indirectly, to fellow members of the truth movement. Some of these members have decided that now that Bush and Cheney are out of office and the Obama administration has reversed some of their 9/11-based policies, that getting the truth about 9/11 revealed is no longer so important. Other members of the movement, seeing that the Obama administration is still presupposing that al-Qaeda attacked America on 9/11, have concluded that there is no hope that this truth will ever be revealed. So we might as well give up. To such people, I suggest that getting the truth revealed is just as important as ever, because many 9/11-based policies, as Annie has just indicated, especially the war in Afghanistan, have not been reversed. I also suggest that because of the changes in the political landscape, combined with developments in the 9/11 Truth movement, we now have, really for the first time, a realistic chance of getting a genuine investigation. I turn now to my topic: why official conspiracy theorists should take a second look at 9/11. I use the term official conspiracy theorists advisedly. Quite often, people who believe the official theory about 9/11 speak contemptuously of members of the truth movement as conspiracy theorists. But this is irrational. A conspiracy occurs whenever two or more people plan in secret to do something illegal, such as rob a bank or defraud a corporation's investors. To hold a conspiracy theory about some event is simply to believe that that event came about because of some such planning. According to the Bush-Cheney interpretation of 9/11, the attacks resulted from a conspiracy between Osama bin Laden and 19 members of Al-Qaeda. This official account is therefore a conspiracy theory. What this means is that everyone holds a conspiracy theory about 9/11. The debate about 9/11 is therefore not a debate between conspiracy theorists and people who reject conspiracy theories. It is simply a debate between those who accept the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory and those who accept the alternative theory, according to which 9/11 happened as a result of a conspiracy within the Bush-Cheney administration. Those who believe the official conspiracy theory, therefore, cannot rationally reject the alternative theory on the grounds that it is a conspiracy theory. To be rational, they must ask, which theory is better supported by the relevant facts? And once they are willing to ask this question and then to look at the facts, the game is up, because the facts are overwhelmingly against the official conspiracy theory. Let me make clear that I do not use the term official conspiracy theory as a term of reproach. There's nothing wrong with believing the official theory. I accepted it at one time myself, in fact, for the first year and a half, before I looked at the evidence. It is only a problem if you are a true believer, meaning that you are so certain that the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory is true that you refuse to look at evidence that might contradict it. One reason why it is irrational to keep believing the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory without being willing to look at new evidence is that there are now grounds for being skeptical of that theory that did not exist at the time that this theory became imprinted on most minds. At that time, for example, it was not known that the Bush-Cheney administration would tell enormous lies that would lead to millions of deaths, including thousands of American deaths. But we now know this. Besides the lies about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the White House after 9/11 ordered the Environmental Protection Agency to lie about the air at the World Trade Center site, to say that the air was safe to breathe, which it was not, and they knew it. As a result, about 60% of the 40,000 ground zero workers, those who worked in the rescue and the cleanup operations are ill if they have not died already. And the number of those who will die from these illnesses will probably far exceed the number of people who died on 9/11 itself. These people were also murdered. In the face of this information, it would be difficult to claim that the Bush-Cheney administration would have been morally incapable of orchestrating 9/11 and its cover-up. Now, I realize that for this audience, I probably don't need to make this point. But in America, many people still believe the Bush-Cheney administration was simply too moral, too Christian to have done such a heinous thing. We also now have reasons, not widely known at the time, to be skeptical of the official reports. Most people have assumed that the 9/11 Commission was run by its co-chairman, former Republican Governor Thomas Kean and former Democratic Congressman Lee Hamilton. They have thought of it, therefore, as an independent, nonpartisan, impartial commission. But the 9/11 Commission was actually run by Philip Zelikow. He controlled the 85-person staff, which did all the work, and he was in charge of producing the 9/11 Commission report. And yet he was essentially a member of the Bush-Cheney White House, being especially close to Condoleezza Rice, with whom he had co-authored a book. This is the same Condoleezza Rice about whom it has just come out in the past couple weeks that she authorized torture. Thanks to a book about the 9/11 Commission by New York Times reporter Philip Sheenan, we now know that Zelikow, in spite of promises to the contrary, remained in contact with Rice and also with Karl Rove, the ultimate political operator in the White House. Sheenan, during all the time that Zelikow was running the commission, he was interacting with them. Sheenan also revealed that before Zelikow's staff had even had its first meeting, Zelikow had already written a detailed outline of the 9/11 Commission report, complete with chapter headings, subheadings, and sub-subheadings. Sheenan also revealed that Kean and Hamilton conspired with Zelikow to keep the fact of this outline a secret from their staff. In a book they wrote about the 9/11 Commission, Kean and Hamilton criticized conspiracy theorists because, rather than forming their theories on the basis of facts, they start with their theories and then look for facts to support them. By contrast, Kean and Hamilton claimed the 9/11 Commission started with the relevant facts, not with a conclusion. We were not setting out to advocate one theory or interpretation of 9/11 versus another, they wrote. And yet, they admit, Zelikow assigned the subject of Al-Qaeda to one of the staff's teams, which was told to tell the story of Al-Qaeda's most successful operation, the 9/11 attacks. If that was not starting with a conclusion about 9/11, what would be? If the 9/11 Commission was not independent of the Bush-Cheney White House, what about NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which prepared the official reports on the destruction of the World Trade Center? NIST is an agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce. During the years it was preparing its reports, therefore, NIST was an agency of the Bush-Cheney administration. run by an appointee of that administration. Recently, a former employee of this agency has spoken out, saying that NIST has been fully hijacked from the scientific into the political realm. Scientists working for NIST, he said, lost their scientific independence and became little more than hired guns. Everything that came from the hired guns was, he added, routinely filtered through the front office of the Commerce Department and assessed for political implications before release. Moreover, he said, NIST's reports on the World Trade Center also had to be approved by the National Security Agency and the Office of Management and Budget, an arm of the Executive Office of the President, which had a policy person specifically delegated to provide oversight on our work. In other words, NIST could publish nothing that had not been approved by all three of those agencies. As a result, NIST reports, which say that the Twin Towers and Building 7 came down without the aid of explosives, are political, not scientific reports, as any serious examination of these reports will reveal. The authors, with their PhDs in physics and engineering, could not possibly believe the things they have written. If reasons to take a second look at 9/11 are provided by new information about the Bush-Cheney administration and the official reports supporting its conspiracy theory, the same is true of the new shape of the 9/11 truth movement. At one time, it was dismissed as a bunch of kids on the internet. Then, after I joined the movement by writing The New Pearl Harbor, it was dismissed as a bunch of kids on the internet plus an aging theologian. George Monbiot, writing in The Guardian, referred to members of the movement as morons and idiots. Alexander Coburn, writing in Counterpunch, The Nation, and Le Monde Diplomatique, referred to the movement's members as the 9/11 conspiracy nuts, saying that they know nothing about the real world, especially the world of military affairs. Lacking any conception of evidence, he added, they represent the ascendancy of magic over common sense and reason. Insofar as critics of the movement, ignoring the fact that its early leaders included a pilot, a former police officer, a world-class political economist, and a historian, could portray me as its head. Monbiot referred to me as its high priest. Another left-wing critic called me its guru. As one critic put it, Griffin, being a theologian, is not qualified to talk about anything except myths and fairy tales. I did reply, therefore, that I should be eminently qualified to discuss the official conspiracy theory. Nevertheless, the 9/11 truth movement can be easily dismissed insofar as people retain an image of it that was formed several years ago, when it could be portrayed as led by people who have no expertise in the relevant fields. Even if that caricature, like most caricatures, contained a grain of truth then, it is now completely false. The intellectual leadership of the 9/11 truth movement is now exercised by scientists and other professionals who definitely know something about the real world. Many of these professionals have formed organizations dedicated to discovering and publicizing the truth about 9/11. A few years ago, some scientists formed SPINE, the Scientific Panel for the Investigation of 9/11. Other scientists, more recently, formed Scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice, the main work of which has been carried out by physicists and chemists. Shortly thereafter, detractors of the movement said that if there were any validity to these scientists' claims about the World Trade Center, they would be able to get papers published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. During the past year, scientists affiliated with Scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice have published 3 papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals. The first author of the most recent of these papers, which appeared in the Open Chemical Physics Journal, is Niels Harrit, a chemistry professor at the University of Copenhagen. These scientists, who know something about the chemical constituents of the real world, report finding many elements in the World Trade Center dust that should not be there if the official theory, according to which nothing but fire and gravity brought the buildings down, were true. A few years ago, after some physicists and chemists had joined the movement, detractors said, they don't really count. The question of what brought down the World Trade Center is a question for engineers, and your movement doesn't have any. That was true in 2005. But the following year, architect Richard Gage formed Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And by now, over 650 licensed architects and engineers have signed a petition saying that the official theory cannot be true and we need a new investigation. These are people who know about that part of the real world constituted by steel frame high-rise buildings. And they know that the official story, according to which fires caused the Twin Towers and Building 7 to come straight down in virtual free fall, cannot be true. For example, Jack Keller, emeritus professor of engineering at Utah State University, who had been given special recognition some years back by Scientific American, has said that about the collapse of Building 7, obviously it was the result of controlled demolition. Obviously. The same judgment has been offered by 2 emeritus professors of structural engineering at Zurich's prestigious Federal Institute of Technology, along with hundreds of other architects and engineers. Firefighters also have expert knowledge that is relevant to what happened in New York City on 9/11. And this past year brought the formation of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, who point out on the basis of their professional expertise why the NIST reports about the World Trade Center should not be believed. There is also an organization of veterans for 9/11 Truth with several former military officers. They probably, I would venture to say, know more about the real world of military affairs than does Alexander Coburn. And they reject the official story. Another professional organization with relevant expertise is Pilots for 9/11 Truth, which includes in its ranks many former commercial and military pilots who call incredible, impossible, the official story about why the 9/11 airliners were not intercepted. This organization has also devoted much attention to the Pentagon attack, pointing out many reasons why the official account of that attack cannot be true. They have said similar things about the crash or the alleged crash of Flight 93, the one that supposedly crashed in Pennsylvania. The latest of the professional organizations to form is Intelligence Officers for 9/11 Truth, which has been formed indeed by Annie McComb. One of the first people to join was William Christensen, a former senior CIA official. If you are one of the people who just knows that the position of the 9/11 Truth movement is too implausible to be worth a few days of your time to study, listen to what he wrote in 2006. I spent the first 4.5 years since September 11th utterly unwilling to consider seriously the conspiracy theories surrounding the attacks of that day. In the last half year, and after considerable agony, I've changed my mind. I now think there is persuasive evidence that the events of September 11th did not unfold as the Bush administration and the 9/11 Commission would have us believe. Who do you believe knows more about the real world of intelligence affairs, Alexander Coburn or former CIA senior official? The backbone of the 9/11 Truth movement is now constituted by these professional organizations of scientists, architects, engineers, firefighters, military officers, pilots, and intelligence officers. And there are still more. This past year has witnessed the formation of medical professionals for 9/11 Truth, lawyers for 9/11 Truth, religious leaders for 9/11 Truth, and very recently, political leaders for 9/11 Truth, which already includes past or present members of the parliaments of Australia, Denmark, Germany, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, Pakistan, Sweden, the United States, the UK, and Europe. And also a former governor of one of the states in the United States. Accordingly, people who have thought of the movement as constituted by those who can be dismissed as conspiracy nuts, even morons and idiots, need to reevaluate if they want their opinions to be based on the real world. Here is the present situation. And if you are a journalist who is going to quote one sentence from my lecture, and let me mention, just in these very weeks, a new organization is being formed, media professionals for 9/11 Truth. So if you are a journalist or some other media professional, if you will give me your email address, I will send it to the organizers of this new organization. So now, here's the sentence that, if you're going to quote one, I would suggest you quote. Among independent scientists and professionals in the relevant fields who have studied the evidence, the weight of scientific and professional opinion is now overwhelmingly on the side of the 9/11 Truth movement. Whereas well over 1,000 such people have gone on record publicly, some of them at the risk of their jobs, to question the official theory. There are virtually no scientists and no professionals in the relevant fields who have studied the evidence and yet have gone on public record in support of the official conspiracy theory, except for those people who are not independent, meaning that their livelihoods are dependent upon their publicly supporting the official story. Now, this caveat is important because, as Sinclair Lewis, a famous American muckraker and writer, said in 1935, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Except for such people," let me quote that again. "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Except for such people, virtually everyone who has expertise in a relevant field and who has seriously studied the evidence rejects the official conspiracy theory. It is time, therefore, for journalists and everyone else to take a second look." Journalists often say they cannot write about an issue that is considered old news. They must have new evidence. Another reason why it is time for a second look at 9/11 is the existence of a wealth of new evidence. There is so much that I can mention only a small portion of it. My latest book is The New Pearl Harbor Revisited, which brings up to date to the end of 2008 the story that I had told in the New Pearl Harbor back in 2004. All this new evidence, the book is this thick. There is a lot of new evidence. So here's a tiny portion of it. Some of this evidence has amazingly been supplied by our FBI. Although the FBI was originally the main agency creating and protecting the official account, it has recently provided several revelations that undermine this account seriously. One example involves one of the central pillars of the official conspiracy theory, the claim that the attacks were authorized by Osama bin Laden. That claim is still used to support the American military effort in Afghanistan, which President Obama recently encouraged Europeans to support more wholeheartedly. But if you will go to the FBI website labeled Most Wanted Terrorists and turn to its page on Osama bin Laden, you will find that he is wanted for various terrorist attacks, but that he is not mentioned, but that 9/11 is not one of the terrorist attacks he is wanted for. When one member of the 9/11 movement called the FBI to ask why not, he got the head of investigative publicity, who said, because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. Now, the papers in the United States have not revealed that to us, but I'm sure here in Germany you have a much more open press, so you've probably all heard that, right? How many people have read this in a German newspaper? Let's see, I'm up to 0 so far. Another example involves the reported telephone calls from the airliners, through which people on the ground were told that the planes had been hijacked by Middle Eastern terrorists. Some 15 people reported that they had been called by loved ones using mobile phones. United Flight 93, the plane that supposedly crashed in Pennsylvania, was by itself said to have been the source of about 12 of these mobile phone calls. One passenger, Dina Burnett, reported that she had received 3 or 4 calls from her husband, Tom Burnett, on from his cell phone, his mobile phone. She knew he was using his mobile phone, she said, because she looked at her caller ID and recognized Tom's mobile phone number. There could be no doubt. She told that to the FBI that very day. And she has reported it on national television and then in a book that she wrote. However, most of these reported calls were made, reportedly, when the planes were 35,000 or over 40,000 feet in the air. I apologize, we Americans speak in terms of feet, but that's very high. That's cruising altitude. What would that be in, pardon? 10,000 meters, thank you. Pilots and scientists in the 9/11 Truth Movement pointed out that given the mobile phone technology in 2001, such calls from airliners, high-altitude airliners, were not possible. Defenders of the official theory, such as Popular Mechanics, published by the Hearst Corporation, said, "Oh no, that's not true. You can make cell phone calls, mobile phone calls, from 40,000, even 50,000 feet. 10,000 or what? 14,000 meters? But while Popular Mechanics was making this claim, the FBI was pulling the rug out from under it. This was 2006. This was the year of the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker. And the FBI was required to present evidence to the trial, which included evidence of the phone calls from all four airliners. In its report on Flight 93, it said that there were indeed, as has been reported, 37 calls from this plane, but that 35 of them were made on seatback phones, onboard phones. Only 2 calls, they said, were made from mobile phones. And these were made when the plane was just about to crash, so it was down at a very low altitude. The FBI, in other words, agreed with the 9/11 Truth Movement that high-altitude mobile phone calls were not possible, even though those calls had been, reported calls, had been essential to establishing the official account of 9/11. Popular Mechanics was left with egg on its face. For our purposes, however, the important point is that the FBI was now saying that people such as Dina Burnett, who were certain that they had been called from mobile phones, were wrong. But how could have Dina been wrong given the fact that she repeatedly recognized Tom's number on her caller ID? The FBI, which had taken her testimony on 9/11 without disputing it, did not answer this question. But there's only one possible answer. These calls had to have been faked, fabricated. And there was the technology to do that. The technology of voice morphing had been perfected sufficiently by 1999 that you could fool your best friend, even your spouse. A story in the Washington Post reported a demonstration using the voice of Colin Powell and another general. People in the room who knew them very well would have sworn those were the voices of those generals, but they were not. Likewise, there is a technology. You can order these devices on the internet in which you can, they say, fake any phone call you want. You can make any phone call, any phone number you want show up on somebody's caller ID. That's probably what happened to Dina Burnett. In any case, the FBI contradicted the official story even more seriously in its report on phone calls from Flight 77. The most important of all the so-called phone calls from the planes were those from Barbara Olson, a well-known commentator on CNN, and the wife of Ted Olson, the Solicitor General at the Department of Justice. He was the attorney who successfully defended before the Supreme Court in 2000 the claim that the recount in Florida should be stopped, which would mean that Bush and Cheney would move into the White House. Had the recount continued, Al Gore would have become president. So Ted Olson was a very important figure. You have him to thank for 8 years of Bush and Cheney. On 9/11, Ted Olson told CNN and the FBI that his wife, Barbara, was on Flight 77 and that she had called him twice from that flight. This, of course, was the flight that supposedly hit the Pentagon, and that she had reported that hijackers had taken over the plane, hijackers who were armed with knives and box cutters, we say. I stress that point because of all the alleged phone calls from the planes, this was the only one that mentioned box cutters. So you get an idea of how important this alleged call was to establishing the official myth about 9/11. It was also very important because radar had lost Flight 77 in the Midwest, and it was believed that the flight had crashed, which would have meant that it could not have crashed into the Pentagon. Her reported calls were taken as proof that Flight 77 was still in the air, so it could have been what caused the damage to the Pentagon. So these calls were extremely important also for getting the war on terror started. Barbara Olson was very well known in America. Virtually everyone knew who she was, and she was extremely popular with the right wing because she had attacked leftists like Hillary Clinton. These were extremely important alleged calls. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice, and yet the FBI's report on Flight 77, published in 2006, 3 years ago, said implicitly that Ted Olson's story about his wife was not true. The former Solicitor General of the Department of Justice. Either way, and how do we account for this? Either we have to say Ted Olson was duped, like Dina Burnett, or else he simply lied, made it up. Either way, the story is based on a lie. It's a lie, a deception. Now, I'm sure your newspapers, so let me see that hand. This, remember, 2006, this has been available for almost 3 years. So surely by now your newspapers, no? When I spoke in the European Parliament last year, when we showed Giulietta Chiesa's new film, Zero, there was a technological glitch, and Chiesa leaned over to me and said, kill some time. So I started babbling on, And one thing I told was this story. And I said, this should have been 3-inch screaming headlines in the New York Times and the Washington Post. FBI says former Solicitor General of the Department of Justice story about Barbara Olson is not true. A few months later, a group called the Freebies put out a video, based on the Bee Gees' Staying Alive, and they called it 9/11's a Lie, 9/11's a Lie. And in the middle of that film, I was very pleased to see the Washington Post with 3-inch headlines saying, FBI says Ted Olson's story is a lie. In any case, how many people would still believe the official story if they knew these facts that the FBI has now revealed that undermine the official story, but our mainstream press refuses to tell us about? Very few. This supports my point that most people who continue to believe the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory believe it only because they are unaware of the dozens or even hundreds of facts that contradict this story. For my final illustration of this point, I will discuss the collapse of Building 7 of the World Trade Center. The truth movement has long considered this collapse the official theory's Achilles heel, its most vulnerable element, for several reasons. Building 7 was not hit by a plane. It had fires on only a few of its 47 floors. And it came straight down in virtual free fall, looking every bit like the kind of controlled demolition known as implosion, in which the building folds in on itself and ends up as a rather tidy pile of debris. Defenders of the official story clearly did not want the public to focus on this building during the first several years. The 9/11 Commission did not even mention the collapse of this building. Is this not remarkable? The first building in our universe, steel frame, high-rise building, to come down because of fire alone, and they could not afford one sentence in their 571-page report to mention that this building collapsed. Likewise, after 9/11 itself, the day of 9/11 itself, this collapse was seldom, if ever, I think never, shown on American TV again. And evidently, from what I understand, not on European television networks either. And NIST continued to delay its report year after year. The report was supposed to come out simultaneously with the report on the Twin Towers in 2005. But NIST said, oh, we're not finished yet, we'll have it next year. When 2006 came, they said, we're not finished yet, we'll have it next year. When 2007 came, they said, we're not finished yet, we'll have it next January. When January of 2008 came, they said, not finished yet, we'll have it in August. They did publish a preliminary report, a draft for public comment in August of 2008, with the final report coming out in November of 2008, just as Bush and Cheney were about to leave office. My next book will be about NIST report on Building 7. This book will show that their report inadvertently reveals that a plausible defense of the official theory about Building 7, according to which it was brought down by fire alone, is simply impossible. To attempt this defense, NIST had to ignore various kinds of physical evidence in the World Trade Center dust, such as the existence of particles that could have been formed only at extremely high temperatures, temperatures 3 or more times higher than could have been caused by the fires. The dust also includes elements that seem explainable only as residue from nanothermite, which is classified as a high explosive. Thermite, ordinary thermite, is an incendiary. It causes fires. It's been around for over 100 years. But nanothermite was only created in the 1990s. And it is an incendiary, but also a high explosive, more powerful than most explosives, high explosives that you know about. The dust even includes active thermitic material discovered by physicist Stephen Jones, which appears to be unreacted nanothermite, because when you put a flame to it, it explodes. So it's not paint. This is the conclusion of the new paper which I mentioned earlier, for which the first author is Copenhagen's Niels Harrit, who is an expert in nanochemistry. When NIST was asked whether it had checked the dust for evidence of thermite, it said no. When a reporter asked Michael Newman, a NIST spokesman, why not, he said, because there was no evidence of that. This circular answer led the reporter to ask, but how can you know there's no evidence if you don't look for it first? Newman replied, if you're looking for something that isn't there, you're wasting your time and the taxpayers' money. NIST also ignored and distorted testimonial evidence that explosions had gone off in Building 7. The most important such testimony was given by Barry Jennings of the New York City Housing Authority. As soon as the North Tower was struck that morning at 8:46 a.m., Jennings rushed, as he was supposed to the 23rd floor of Building 7, which housed Mayor Rudy Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management. But when he got there, along with Michael Hess, Giuliani's lead attorney for New York City, his corporation counsel, they found that everyone had left, and left suddenly. There were half-eaten sandwiches. There were steaming coffee cups. Calling to ask what they should do, Jennings was told, you should get out of the building and get out of there fast. They tried to go down the elevator. It would not work. So they started running down the stairs as fast as they could. Jennings, a big man, said he was taking a landing at a time. But when they got to the 6th floor, Jennings said the landing was blown out from under them by a giant explosion, and they were only barely able to hold on to a pole, pull themselves up, go back up to the 8th floor, where they broke a window and signaled for help. And Jennings said, I looked out the window this way and that way, and I saw both towers were still standing. They had been struck at that time, but they were still standing. Which makes sense, because this would have been about 9:15. However, when Giuliani wrote about the 9/11 experience of his friend Michael Hess, he claimed that this big event that they called an explosion was really just some effects from the debris from the collapse of Building 1, the North Tower. Now, when did the North Tower come down? At 10:28. So at least about an hour and a quarter later than the event they reported. Nevertheless, Giuliani's version became the official story. It was defended by NIST in its 2005 report on the Twin Towers, which also mentioned a little bit about Building 7. And then in 2008, by a BBC special on Building 7. And by the way, the BBC, which was at one time a great network, has now become one of the main defenders of the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory about 9/11. Jennings had told his story in an interview for the producers of Loose Change Final Cut, for which I happen to be the script consultant, so I know something about what went on behind the scenes. Before the film was released, Jennings begged Dylan Avery, the main maker of the film, to delete his interview from the film for fear that he would lose his job. Avery agreed. But later, Jennings gave an interview for the BBC, told the same story, but the BBC put his story within the official timeline. And so they made it appear as if what Jennings called a big explosion was just, as the British narrator put it, just debris from a falling skyscraper. The BBC even made it seem as if Jennings was all by himself, rather than accompanied by Hess, even though Jennings kept saying, "We went down the stairs, and then we climbed back up to the 8th floor." They made it seem as if Jennings was all by himself. This BBC program was aired in July of 2008. NIST, whose timeline the BBC had followed, released the first draft, this draft for public comment, on Building 7 the following month, August of 2008. Shortly before this release, evidently only 2 days before, Barry Jennings, who was 53 years old, appeared to have died mysteriously. Those who have tried to find out why he died couldn't get no answer, other than that he died in a hospital. Whatever the cause of his death, it was certainly convenient. He was not around to be interviewed again, perhaps by the Loose Change producers, after the NIST report appeared. And the BBC was able to put out a new version of its report on Building 7, this time including Michael Hess, who since 2002 had been the vice chairman of Rudy Giuliani's consulting business. Not surprisingly, Hess supported the official timeline. The BBC made much of this, saying, well, conspiracy theorists have said we distorted Jennings' timeline. But Michael Hess, who was there, confirms that we got the timeline right, that the so-called explosion was really just debris from the falling North Tower. To see the falsity of that timeline, one only has to look at the interview of Jennings by the Loose Change producers, which you can now see on the internet. Look under Barry Jennings Uncut. The timely and mysterious death of Jennings, moreover, may well indicate just how threatening the truth about Building 7 is to the official conspiracy theory about 9/11. In any case, I will point out one more way in which Building 7 has proved to be the Achilles heel of the Bush-Cheney administration's conspiracy theory about 9/11. I mentioned earlier that Building 7 came down in virtual freefall. In the first draft of its report, which was issued in August of last year, NIST claimed that the collapse took far longer than would a free-fall collapse. This was very important to NIST because the 9/11 Truth Movement had been saying all along, Building 7 came down in free fall or virtual free fall. And NIST said, oh, no, 40% slower than free fall, not really close. It also explained why NIST did. Given its theory, which is a theory of progressive collapse, absolute free fall would have been impossible. But David Chandler, a high school physics teacher in the United States, produced a video showing that the building came down in absolute free fall for over 2 seconds. Now, absolute free fall means that if you had dropped a brick off the side of the building, at the same time the building started to collapse, the brick and the roof line would have descended at the same acceleration. They would have accelerated simultaneously. That would mean that there was absolutely nothing, no steel, no concrete, no nothing, stopping or delaying, slowing down the fall of the top part of the building. That means that all 82 steel columns had to disappear. They couldn't be giving any resistance whatsoever. Besides putting his video on the internet, Chandler confronted NIST with his evidence at a public meeting which was broadcast live. So there was no way that NIST could hide what he had revealed. In its final report, which came out in November, NIST rather amazingly admitted that Building 7 came down in absolute free fall for 2.25 seconds. But it had not changed its theory, which says that free fall is impossible. So you had an absolute contradiction in this final report between its admission of the empirical fact of absolute free fall and a theory of progressive collapse that rules out absolute free fall. This contradiction can be seen as the ultimate self-destruction of the official conspiracy theory about what happened in New York on 9/11, which says that Muslim terrorists brought down 3 high-rise buildings at free fall speed by crashing planes into 2 of them. I will conclude by addressing members of the 9/11 Truth Movement, both old members and any new members that this lecture may have created. I'm an optimist. Rather than letting up on our efforts to get the truth about 9/11 revealed, now is the time to work even harder. Jens mentioned in the introduction that my latest book, The New Pearl Harbor Revisited, was named Pick of the Week in November of last year by Publishers Weekly. Publishers Weekly is, in the English-speaking world, the Bible for book stores and librarians. It tells them of the thousands of books that are published every week, which ones are worth getting. In 2004, it panned my New Pearl Harbor, calling it ridiculous, absurd conspiracy theory. When I put out my second book on the 9/11 Commission report, it said essentially the same thing. But in 2008, it named my book as one of the 51 best books of the year. That is a remarkable cultural shift. So I tell this story not just to brag, but that too, but to point out that something remarkable has happened. Publishers Weekly relies on its prestige. It would do nothing to endanger its reputation. In 2004, 2005, it would not have dared to say such a thing about my books, to say that these books that say that 9/11 was an inside job are good books, among some of the best books of the year. But in 2008, obviously they would have had a meeting. They would have debated, do we dare do this? Even if we believe it, can we say it? Will it destroy our reputation? They said it. So it suggests that the fear is starting to dissipate. The fear of endorsing the alternative conspiracy theory. So journalists now may start to follow suit. Maybe some editors will have the courage to publish some things. Maybe some editors will lose their jobs for the sake of the good of the world. We can hope so. This shift in the status of the 9/11 Truth movement and its theory will be intensified, this cultural shift, as people become more aware of all these organizations that I have named, architects and engineers and scientists and intelligence officers and political leaders and religious leaders and on and on and on for 9/11 Truth. As people realize that the evidence is overwhelmingly on our side, and the fact that these organizations of professionals and scientists have formed is proof for those who don't have time to study for themselves that the evidence is on our side. So I would say now that we should take it as given that the truth about 9/11 has been established beyond any reasonable doubt. The truth being simply that the official story is a lie. The details we can debate about what really happened. The only thing that is really important is the official story is false, therefore we need a new investigation, an independent investigation. So what we need to do now is focus our attention on getting this truth publicly recognized. And I would suggest there are at least two major ways to do this. One way is through the political route. So let's do everything we can to build up political leaders for 9/11 Truth and intelligence officers for 9/11 Truth. These organizations that will be persuasive to politicians that the truth is on our side and not on the other side, and bring pressure on the Obama administration to inaugurate a new investigation, or to have investigations by commissions in European countries, maybe Europe as a whole or in a collection of European countries. It won't help if it's done in an unfriendly country. The United States can dismiss it. But if it's done in Germany, in France, they cannot dismiss such a thing as done by people who are hostile, historically hostile to the United States. A second route would be the legal route. Any country that lost people in 9/11 can institute a suit to say, we don't believe the truth has been established as to why our citizens were killed. Any family that has lost loved ones in 9/11 can institute a suit. And now, because we have lawyers for 9/11 Truth, there are lawyers you can find who would represent you. So everybody here knows a lawyer probably. Talk to your lawyer. Tell him about the evidence, him or her, and build up this organization. So we've only got, with lawyers and political leaders now, around 50 members in each organization. Architects and engineers is headed towards 1,000. We need to get up to several hundred in these. Also religious leaders for 9/11 Truth. Most people know some religious leader who might be open to evidence. And this is the main reason, one of the main reasons I was interested in coming to Europe, is to spread the word about all of these new organizations and encourage people to either sign up or tell their friends, acquaintances about these organizations to build those up. So it gives an answer to a question I'm always asked, well, what can I do as an ordinary citizen? You know, you, Dr. Griffin, you can write books, you can give lectures, but what can I do? Well, you know these people. You can help build up these organizations. So that's the thought I would lead you with. And the reason this is important is because we do need an investigation that will finally reveal, publicly reveal, the truth about 9/11 so that the policies that were based on the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory about 9/11 can finally and completely be reversed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think we can now open the debate. I can ask my friends to collect your questions. I already have some little questions here. Maybe I'll start with the most common one. What is your idea about the journalists and the news agencies being so silent about 9/11? Why is that so?
Well, we have a little problem in our world. It's called plutocracy. The rich control everything. They control the media. The rich are getting richer because of 9/11 and the so-called war on terror. They will not allow their reporters to report these things. If reporters report them or try to report them, they will lose their jobs. They know that. So we've got a very serious problem. So I'm not suggesting that getting the truth out is going to be easy. I'm just saying that it's more possible now than it was before, and because there is a possibility, and because getting the truth revealed is so important, so overwhelmingly important, for the reasons Annie listed earlier, we should try. The quotation I read from Sinclair Lewis, that applies preeminently to journalists. Journalists just can't understand what we're saying because they're paid not to understand it. I have some experience of people who no longer are employed and suddenly can see the truth. It's a serious problem. So you shouldn't be so hard on the journalists themselves. Many of them know. Even, I got a report the other day from somebody who had talked to members of Fox News. If you know, Fox News in the United States is the most right-wing TV network. And some of the Fox News reporters say, oh, we know, but our executives will not let us report these facts.
Okay, one more question. Who could head an investigation if so many states and institutions are kind of complicit in actually the policy of 9/11?
Yes, that's another serious problem, and we don't know which countries were complicit. We've got a pretty good idea with some of them that they at least knew in advance that the attacks were coming. But with other countries, we don't know. For example, I don't know about Germany, whether the German leaders knew in advance or not. The Canadian and others. Now, with regard to Japan, we have a very interesting situation because the one of the two founders of political leaders for 9/11 Truth is Yukihisa Fujita. He is a senator. He's in the upper house in Japan. And he was exposed to 9/11 Truth by a citizen in Japan. She happened to be the citizen who had translated the New Pearl Harbor into Japanese. But she already knew. She didn't learn this from that. She was already there before I was, I think. But this is an example of what an ordinary citizen can do. By happening to know Fujita, she was able to talk to him and convince him. And then he stood up in the Japanese parliament in a committee meeting, but a big committee meeting that was being televised nationally, and argued that Japan should withdraw from the war on terror, should withdraw its support from the United States war on terror, because 9/11 was a lie. And he presented the evidence with graphs and charts and pictures of the Pentagon and so on. Fujita's party, he's not the leader of his party, but he's a high-ranking member of the party. It's almost certain that they will win control of the government whenever the next election is held. So there will be the possibility that the Japanese government as such might speak out about 9/11. So that's one possibility. And if that could occur in Japan, it could occur in other countries that were not complicit, or at least where the present leaders of the country were not in office at the time and were not complicit. So there are possibilities. And then I know some of these questions were raised before written before I made my final point, but I would repeat again that even more likely might be the legal route. William Pepper is an American lawyer, quite well known, who also works a lot in Europe. He is the lawyer who proved in a legal case, in a court case, that Martin Luther King was not assassinated by James Earl Ray. This is proved now. The American press has not revealed this proof to the American people. That's pretty astounding. So still officially in the press, James Earl Ray is still guilty of assassinating Martin Luther King, even though the evidence is overwhelming that it was our own FBI. Anyway, Bill Pepper has argued that even more likely than the political route might be the legal route. And so he has encouraged people who are in position to initiate a lawsuit to do so. And he has essentially volunteered his services to this. And there are many other lawyers who belong to Lawyers for 9/11 Truth. And hopefully soon there will be many more from Europe. And so this is another route. So we shouldn't think it's hopeless. There are ways that this could be done. And there are other ways that right now I don't want to talk about, but that have raised my own estimation from saying maybe we have a 5% possibility to maybe 15 or 20% possibility now. So those are pretty good odds, worth fighting for.
Okay. One more question about your term inside job.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly do you mean with respect to, was it self-fabricated or was the government letting it happen?
In the early days of the 9/11 movement, there was a lot of debate between these two views. And there, I had laid out, I think, one time 5 or 7 different views, but essentially there were 3 basic views about 9/11. One was the official theory. The second was that the government knew the attacks were coming and let them happen. This was called, in English, LIHOP. letting it happen on purpose, and then MIHOP making it happen on purpose. But that debate is over, particularly now with the strong evidence of the demolition, this even stronger evidence than we had before of demolition. You cannot simply let steel frame high-rise buildings collapse vertically at free fall speed. You cannot just let them come down. They have to be made to come down. This is a very intricate operation that takes hundreds, thousands of hours of setting the explosives, getting them just in the right places, and then they put on computers. They have to come down in just the right order. So certainly the World Trade Center couldn't have been just let happen. And the same thing with the Pentagon. You can't just let the Pentagon be attacked. It was self-inflicted.
Could you speculate a bit or explain a little bit what you expect when the truth about 9/11 will become public? What will happen, or what will probably be likely to happen then?
Well, you know, people are tempted to say all hell will break loose. I would rather say all heaven will break loose, being a theologian. I think the effects will be very, very good, both for America and the world. I've indicated why I think for the world. I mean, get rid of this nonsense about that we're endangered by terrorism. We're endangered only by our own governments that are fabricating these false flag operations. And you know, just at the very trivial level, this nonsense that we go through every time we get on an airplane, there's just no reason for this, that you can't take a bottle of water on the plane because you might make a bomb out of a water bottle. I mean, it's just absurd. Because two guys said they were going to do it, you know. But more seriously, I think for Americans, and this naturally is my main focus, because America has, over the past century, been the main problem in the world. We have been an empire in the making, really for 2 centuries, but seriously for over a century, certainly since 1898, when we took over Cuba and the Philippines, and this was en route to taking over China was our goal, capturing the China market. And Americans have not understood this. We've had this notion that other countries were empires, other countries were imperialists, but we were not. We were the exceptional nation. Certainly we built up a good big military, but that was simply to protect democracy. It was simply to protect the world from the evil, fill in the blanks, the evil Soviets, the evil Nazis, the evil Japanese, and now the evil Muslims. And who will it be next? But now we're going broke, so we're not going to be quite as dangerous in the near future. But if we don't get the truth about 9/11 revealed, we will recover pretty strongly economically within some years, and we will be on the rampage again. And so it's most important that Americans know these things. First of all, that we have been an imperialist nation for well over a century. Secondly, that we have done many, many, many horrible things for the sake of the American empire. We have destroyed many, many countries, Iran being one of the most obvious. And now Iraq, but I mean, clear back in the 50s, what we did to Iran, and Guatemala, and most of South America, and on and on and on and on. And we were torturing people way back then. We've been torturing for a long, long time. This isn't a brand new thing. So these things need to be known. Secondly, American people need to know that 9/11 was carried out for the sake of continuing and expanding the American empire. This document, from which I got the title, The New Pearl Harbor, most of you know this, but let me repeat it for those who don't. This document put out by this neocon organization, neoconservatives, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, on and on, put out a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses. Now, isn't that an interesting title? Not rebuilding America's offenses, because we don't do offense. We just defend. We defend democracy and children and Europe and Japan, and we defend everybody who's good against everybody who's evil. And rebuilding. We were already spending as much money on military affairs as the rest of the world combined. That's staggering, isn't it? As much as the rest of the world, Russia, China, England, we were spending as much as the rest of the world combined. And yet these people said we need to rebuild America's military defenses. This is a remarkable mindset. A very important American named Andrew Bacevich has written some books. One was called American Empire, and the next one was called The New American Militarism. We have become a radically militaristic society. If the American people recognize that we have been going in, I didn't finish what I was going to say there, that this document said all this, what they wanted to do to create a Pax Americana. You remember Pax Romana. Pax Romana, Pax Americana meant an all-inclusive global empire. We would bring peace to the world, the same way the Romans brought peace to Judea. And, as a Christian theologian, I remind you, Jesus was crucified by the Romans, not by the Jews, by the Romans. Crucifixion was a Roman means of death for political prisoners. So it's very interesting that we call ourselves a Christian nation, but nevertheless, we were going to mimic the Roman Empire and be even greater than the Roman Empire. We were to be the first all-inclusive empire. And they said we need to keep increasing military spending to bring about a transformation of the military. This transformation would involve computerized warfare, all of this stuff that has become a reality, but from space, so that we would be able to strike any part of the world immediately from space, and even talking about space-based nuclear weapons. This was all part of the plan. And also attacking, they had 7 countries, all Muslim, on the hit list. So after Afghanistan and Iraq was going to be Iran and Syria and Lebanon and even Saudi Arabia. So they had big ideas, big plans, big imperialist plans. Now, if this comes out and people realize that 9/11 was orchestrated in the name of expanding the American empire, that they deliberately killed American citizens, deliberately told all these enormous lies, deliberately demonized the Muslim world so they could be free to attack any Muslim country they wanted to. If the American people realized that, then I think there would be a revulsion against empire. And we would say, even when we recover financially, economically, we do not want to continue these imperialistic ways. So that's part of what I hope for. More generally, I've been concerned for a long time, long before 9/11, that if we're going to solve our problems, our ecological problems, global apartheid is a very serious problem. Enormous gap between the rich and the poor, with millions of people dying every year just for the lack of adequate food and water. All of these global problems, we need global democracy. We think democracy is a good thing within a country. Why shouldn't it be a good thing within the planet as a whole, within civilization as a whole, where the people as a whole, with their votes, would decide the direction of the world, rather than what we have now, which is militarism and plutocracy, where the rich and the powerful determine the direction of the globe, and the poor get poorer and poorer and poorer. So those would be some of my hopes.
And now a question that I have in a lot of examples here, all questions concerning the story. What's the story with the passengers of the planes?
There are so many things about 9/11, we just have to say, we don't know. But we could know very easily with a real investigation. We could know within weeks if we had a special prosecutor with subpoena power. You promise people immunity if they tell the truth and expose the higher-ups who did it. We could find out. But right now, we don't know what happened with the passengers. In some cases, we don't know that the planes existed. There's just so much we don't know. We don't know what happened to Flight 93. Pilots for Truth have come out with evidence just in the last couple of weeks that it was still aloft after it was allegedly crashed. And there are 2 crash sites in Pennsylvania, and the one that they announced as the official crash site had no evidence of a plane there. Absolutely no evidence of a plane crashing in the site. There's debris around, like a plane had been shot down and stuff had come out. But at what they call the crash site, there's nothing. There was just a little hole in the ground. Now, the official theory was that this plane, the pilot, the Muslim pilot, pointed the plane down when the passengers tried to take over the plane and got it going 570 miles an hour down at an angle, and it hit that soft Pennsylvania soil and went clear down into the ground so far that even the tail section was no longer visible. But they knew that there were hijackers on the plane because on the ground they found the passport of the pilot and a red bandana. You know, the terrorists were allegedly wearing red bandanas. Now, one problem, as a former CIA official pointed out, who had been in Muslim countries, the red bandana is worn by Shiites. Al-Qaeda is Sunni. Now, we know that there was confusion in the early days of the invasion of Iraq, that we found out that leading members of our administration didn't know there was a difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims. So it must have been one of those geniuses who decided that the terrorists should be described as wearing red bandanas. But anyway, just picture this. Here's the plane coming down 570 miles an hour. Here's the bandana on the guy's in the passport in his pocket. And just before he hits the ground, the passport flies out, the bandana comes off and lands on the ground. Now, first I thought that was absurd, but then I thought, oh, you know, I remember now, when I'm flying a plane at 570 miles an hour, I often leave the window open and things fly out. This is how ridiculous the official story is. And I've written a paper, and at least Davidson is here, who's down in the front row. We both have independently written papers showing there is no evidence whatsoever that there are any Muslim Al-Qaeda hijackers on the plane. So I went through 14 of the reputed kinds of evidence and showed that they're all about this ridiculous. So again, come back to my basic point. We don't know what happened to the passengers. We don't know much about the planes. What we do know is one thing: the official story is false about all 4 airliners and all 4 buildings, meaning the Pentagon and the 3 World Trade Center buildings.
One question: what facts first opened your eyes to that 9/11 was a false flag operation or inside job?
It's kind of hard to remember which ones. I know what document it was. It was a brief version of Paul Thompson's timeline, complete 9/11 timeline. And a colleague sent that to a colleague of mine who forwarded it to me, and I read it, and it just took a few hours to see something is seriously wrong. And then I got some other reading material, particularly Nafiz Ahmed's book, which was the first book in English to give a pretty extensive critique of the official theory. So those were my 2 major sources for New Pearl Harbor. But I think the first element of the story that I focused on was the story about the interceptions, why the military is excused for why it didn't intercept the planes. And only later did I come to problems in the Pentagon, and then and I was fairly late coming to the World Trade Center buildings. So I think that's the order. But let's see, I was going to add one point here, but it slipped my mind, so go ahead.
About the present U.S. administration, how are they are involved, or are they opening up towards a 9/11 investigation? What's their policy with 9/11?
Obama's mantra thus far has been, we want to look forward, not backward. And he said this with regard to the torture. And he's coming under enormous pressure from lawyers, leading lawyers, New York Times, virtually everyone saying, this can't stand. We can't have recognition, public recognition that torture occurred. This is violation of international law. This is war crimes. And we can't excuse CIA officials because they say, oh, we got a memo from above that said this was okay. We've known for a very long time that waterboarding is torture. And there's this little thing called the Nuremberg defense that we did not allow. We did not allow that German Nazi officers could say, we were just following orders. If you know the orders are immoral, illegal, you must disobey the orders, no matter what your superiors say. And we prosecuted both Japanese and German officers on those grounds, so we cannot turn around and say now, oh, they're excused because they were just following orders. So that remains to be seen, what will happen. And I've frankly been away from the news now for several weeks, just getting little snippets here and there, so I'm not really up on what has happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But since the truth about the torture is out in public and much discussed, and Obama administration thus far, as far as I know, has not agreed to do anything about it, that means that 9/11 Truth is in far more trouble because it's not even out yet, and the consequences, psychological, economic, political, cultural, everything, would be so much greater with regard to 9/11 than the torture. That the Obama administration would surely be much less inclined to do something. And that's why I stress it will take enormous pressure from friendly governments and professional people and scientists, and yes, journalists. Don't forget this new organization, Media Professionals for 9/11 Truth. So it will take enormous pressure, but this is a worldwide problem we have here. It's not just a United States problem. People say, well, JFK was never revealed. The JFK assassination, the fact that it was an inside job, meaning that it was done by people within the government. CIA was clearly, and Secret Service both involved in that, along with others. And it was pretty obvious. And yet it's never been publicly acknowledged, even though more than 50% of the American people seem to know the official story is false. So people say, well, if that hasn't been revealed publicly after all these years, why do you think 9/11 will? Well, 9/11 is completely different. 9/11 affects virtually all countries. You've had devastating implications for your countries. This was not true with the JFK assassination. That had devastating implications for Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, because JFK was all the evidence suggests he was going to pull out. But for the rest of the world, not so much, so people didn't care so much. Likewise, you didn't have JFK assassination truth movements in how many countries now, Annie, do you know? It's 30 or 40 countries that have 9/11 truth movements. And within America alone, I don't know, there are, something like 100 pretty lively, vital movements, and many within many European countries. So it's completely different, both in its scope and in the intensity and how fast it has moved. Many people say, well, that was 8 years ago. Well, with these things, 8 years is not a long time. It was much longer that after that much came out about the JFK assassination. So we're moving along really pretty fast, and the strength of the 9/11 movement, both in numbers, absolute numbers, and in percentages of the populations of the various countries, and now the growth of these professional organizations, this is rather remarkable. So one can't say because that one never got publicly revealed, this one won't. This is very different.
Okay.
So let me just conclude by thanking you all very much. You've been a superb audience. Thank you.
Wir bedanken uns auch sehr herzlich bei David, dass er hier gewesen ist. Das ist eine ganz außergewöhnliche Geschichte, muss man sagen. We are also thankful to Annie to organize the European tour and putting us on the schedule. And we hope having you back on many more events and bigger events in Germany, and we look forward to the future. That it is going to be a very important political stream in Europe. We hope it will be. And if you did like the lecture today, maybe you can contribute a little donation at the exit in this little blue pot. So to keep up the good work of David Ray Griffin. Thank you.